So you want to run an open stage, a cautionary tale. I was inspired to do this video because there are some people I know, some musical acquaintances who have kind of semi-spontaneously decided that they want to host an open stage. And having come about somewhat impulsively, somewhat suddenly, from my outsider perspective, I can see that they are somewhat unprepared to handle it. And while I'm pulling for them, and while I want them to succeed, um, on the current course they're on, my guess is that it's not going to last much longer. Although all of the struggles they're having, I think, are fixable. That's the good news. Now they're not asking for my advice, and I don't feel like it's my place to like say, hey, you're doing it wrong, and who asked you, Cody? But I think it's interesting to think about the issues they're facing, as well as some others that those remind me of that I've seen before, and to sort of talk about if you are thinking, hey, hosting open a stage sounds like a great gig for me, and you've never done it before. Here's some things that I think you need to consider right at the outset. And some of these are things that I've covered before, or I've talked about before, in more depth. And I'll try to use the links above to point you back to those other videos where I go into more depth on these things. But for now, here's kind of an overview. Okay, first things first. You need to go in and have like a sense of what your format is, what your structure is. You need to have a plan for how it's going to work, and that can be what you personally feel is your favorite way that you've experienced as a player, or it can be having given a lot of thought which one you think for reasons you've analyzed what you think is going to be best. um, I talk a little bit about how I feel about that in the first video in this series, and I stand by that the format that I've adopted everywhere I've run an open stage is one that I think is, for a variety of reasons, the optimal, the best way to do it, the most typical, but also for good reason, the most advantageous way to run an open stage. And in short, if you don't want to go back and watch that video, what I recommend you do is that you have 15 minutes that use time instead of songs. Instead of saying you get 3 songs, 2 songs, you say you have 15 minutes, and that you uh, have a sign up sheet where people need to be present in order to sign up at the beginning of the open stage. I advise against doing advanced signups, although other people swear by them, just because in my experience that leads to dive bombing, that leads to unreliable show up rate. If they were here and they had to put their name on the paper, then they're going to be here in an hour when their timer comes up, right? I also advise against kind of a current trend that I'm seeing more and more, and someone can debate me on this and can persuade me otherwise about something I'm not seeing about this, but that is the new kind of trendy format of featured artists. In other words, having within your open stage, there's one or more players who are going to get a longer time, who are going to be known in advance and advertised as part of the show. And implicit in this is that there's some expectation that they're somehow going to deliver more than your typical open stage player. The reason that I would caution against this is because it takes up too much time, and I don't think it offers very much benefit, because in general, the kind of player who's going to take advantage of that opportunity to be a featured player at an open stage, in general, not always, but in general, that's going to be a player who's kind of operating in the bottom rungs of the local scene, who's trying to get those first few gigs, the gigs that are the easiest to get, that doesn't necessarily have a lot going for them, doesn't really have a lot of following necessarily, maybe doesn't have a lot of experience. Whatever it is, they're not going to be like cream of the crop, high draw, well known acts by and large. Now maybe you're going to have somebody who's passing through touring who's a pretty good quality act and is just looking to like have in essence a spontaneous show where they don't have to bring as much gear or whatever. So there are exceptions, but by and large, those featured acts are going to chew up a lot of time, are going to make the other players kind of feel like they're getting treated second class. In my experience, that's what I observe. And it's going to just cause a little bit of a headache as far as like, you're ultimately sacrificing. You could have two, three, maybe four people playing instead of one person, and probably have four times the chances to really deliver and get have a satisfied customer who wants to come back. Which brings me to part two. You need to understand the business of open stages. You need to understand what your role is, what the role of the players is, and what the role of the venue is. You are, in essence, the purveyor. You're in charge. You're the paid. You're the paid player. You're facilitating this open stage, and you have two customers that you have to satisfy slightly differently. And incidentally, don't do open stages for free. It's way too much work. You're going to quickly resent it after 4 weeks of showing up and playing for tips or something like that, hoping that this is a great like exposure gig for you. Always make sure that you're getting paid something that is satisfactory for you to come back. It's rare that you get to do music for a lot of money, but you need to get paid something. You need to establish that that's what you're doing has value. This is my experience, but not everybody feels that way. Some people try to host for free, and again, my observation is that they quickly get frustrated, dissatisfied, and want to quit or hand it off or restructure, and it's kind of too late. So the way the business works, if you don't understand this already, and some people don't, is that you are really selling to the players. You're selling a great open stage experience. You're selling the time, you're selling the opportunity, you're selling the sound, you're selling your expertise, so that all they have to do is show up and they play, and they've got a like-minded, supportive audience to listen and to feel for their 15 minutes or their 10 minutes. Like it's a little bit of the rock star treatment we all kind of crave from time to time. It's a highly competitive business in most cities. Like there are lots of open stages, and the players figure out pretty quick which are the ones that they want to go back to again and again. And you don't get, as they say, you don't get a second chance at your first impression. So it's very important that you have it nailed and dialed in as far as what you're delivering, so that you maximize your chance that a player will become a repeat player. You're going to need to have a stable, of dozens or hundreds of players. It's not going to be enough to just like have your friends come in, because your friends are not going to do this 52 weeks a year, probably. The second client that you serve is the venue. You are typically hosting this open stage on an off night, and they are hoping to increase traffic, increase sales, get the word out about their place. Oh, excuse me. So you need to deliver, and it all kind of falls together. If you are doing the rest of the job right, you'll get that stable of players, but it's a constant effort, and you need to hold yourself accountable, and you need to understand that the venue cares how you do, and they care what kind of job you're doing, and they judge you on a bottom line kind of standard, and that's just how it is. So the next thing, which, these are in no particular order, but the next thing that comes to mind is that you really need to understand some very basic stuff about how to run sound, because it is almost certainly going to be your job to run sound for the event. Um, so you need to know what the gear is that you're going to be using, and you need to practice how to use it. I'll probably do a separate video in my Shop Talk series that's like a little crash course about just general principles of getting, you know, decent sound from basically any board. I've done a kind of a crash course for you know, sort of more sophisticated boards. Like if you've never run sound, like here's how to just get sound coming out of it. But you need to understand what you're going to be working with. It may be that it's a house sound system. If you're very lucky, there's a sound person, but that's pretty rare, and it's pretty rare that an open stage is going to pay for two people to basically host this thing week in, week out. And if they do, it's just going to increase the pressure on you to deliver, because now the expenses just doubled in essence. So you need to understand how to position speakers, how to, you know, how feedback works, how to avoid it. You need to understand how to get a decent vocal sound. You need to understand how to mic a guitar. A lot of open stage players are going to show up with a guitar that you can't plug in. You need to have basic equipment that is reliable. You need to have at least two microphones. Probably four would be ideal. And you need to have cables and a couple backups for everything that you might need to plug in. You need to have some instrument cables. You can't count on the players to provide their own instrument cables when they show up. They're going to assume that you've got that covered. So you got to have it. You need to have some microphone stands that are happy to be there, that are not unreliable, falling down, duct taped together, squeaky, you know, loose, broken. In other words, like you need to have some decent, okay gear. Now, it's the icing on the cake to have things like a guitar stand or things like a music stand, but the bare minimum is you've got to make sure that there are good mic stands, good mics, good instrument cables, and that you know how to use them, and that you know the sort of basics, your basic way around the sound system. And there isn't a whole lot to it to get okay, to get decent enough to do this, but you got to be decent enough. And I've seen, unfortunately, some hosts who aren't up to the task and don't know what to do, and that is the kind of thing that creates a frustrating environment for players, and frankly, they don't come on back. Um, Oh, this might be the last little tidbit, but um, sort of building on the idea of the business, you really need to be very committed to getting the word out on a constant basis. And you got to use social media to your advantage. You got to use any kind of, you know, free event list that like your local papers do, or other, you know, other sources where you can post that events are happening. Um, you need to cross platforms. You need to use the platforms that you favor, and also the ones that maybe you don't. So if you're my age, you might favor Facebook in general, and that's really a pretty good place to get the word out for things like this. There are a lot of Facebook groups, and you need to join or start as many as you can to get the word out. And you need to, I mean, I covered this a little bit in my post-mortem of when my open stage, when the venue closed and my open stage ceased to be, the kind of stats I kept, and kind of keeping track of where it's working, where I'm getting traction, where I'm getting likes and, you know, interactions, and like I mostly focused on Facebook, but I also posted on Instagram. I also posted on Twitter. I also posted in the Willamette Week and Mercury calendars. I just kept it wherever I could get it. The goal here is that if someone types into Google Portland Open Stage, that my open stage comes up in the first 10 results. That's what you're trying to get done. And unfortunately, I see a lot of people who just sort of phone that part in, that they just have like a group for their open stage, and they, you know, just communicate minimally. Like they post on their own Instagram and that's it. Um, you know, you're going to get the word out to some people, but you're really going to be leaving a lot of potential players on, you know, on the table. And you really have to, that's your bread and butter. You got to be thinking, getting creative and getting aggressive, and just really doing whatever it takes to get players through the door. So I hope those are helpful tips. I know it's a little long. I'll leave some links to some other things, some other considerations. But until then, see you at the open stage.